This time on Poll Hub, as if the Iowa caucuses weren't already tough enough to understand, it's not really an election. See, neighbors gather in school cafeterias, and, well, not every candidate can even get any votes. Now, the Iowa Democratic Party is introducing rules that may make it possible for multiple candidates to declare victory. Oh, joy. We'll explain. Also, NPR's Brett Neely is here to talk about election security. We've got new numbers from our brand new poll. What do Americans think is the number one threat to elections? You may be surprised. So let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion. And Jay, you've provided us with innovation. We're using a whole little different gizmo.
A little bit different microphones right now. We'll see how they pan out. Pan left to right. No, that's as bad as your Hawkeye joke from last week. Speaking of which, we're here to talk about Iowa. So I covered caucuses starting back in 1988 as a reporter, and I always had to do the explainer story. So what's a caucus? And try to explain to people that no, it's not an actual election where you go and you cast your ballot and you're done. You show up.
It's much more fun than that.
It is more fun in a way, but it's complicated. People have to show up, and then you go to a gym of a high school nearby, and your neighbors are there, and you separate into sides, and you hear people talk about various candidates. And then if a candidate doesn't get enough votes, and it's your candidate, you have to go to another camp and stand with them, and so it gets very complicated. But
because
Iowa,
there's a threshold.
There's a threshold. So it's difficult to understand sometimes. It's a little complicated. It's a little archaic. But the Iowa Democratic Party has decided to make it more complicated, at least from our standpoint. How have they done this? What are they doing this year that's making it harder to understand who, if anybody, wins?
Well, I think there's a chance we could have, after all this, who's ahead, who's behind in the polls, could even have multiple winners. And there's a notion of...
Oh, please do explain.
Well, you can have vote counts.
Because also, Iowa is not easy for pollsters, but that's a whole other segment.
Whole other thing. But, we have, minor things like instead of exit polls, there will be an entrance poll. This is when everybody shows up before they reassign their positions. So there is going to be a winner potentially of the entrance poll. Then there is going to be vote counts.
And also on the entrance poll, you can have a candidate with less than the threshold of the support because it is in fact an entrance poll of who came to the caucus.
So if a candidate has 5%,
they're going to get reported as 5%.
They're going to have 5%, which means that the other people may get the 5% later, but they haven't got it yet.
But what's so confusing, and I think what's so troubling here, to me, at least in terms of getting the story out, is that, so say 3 different candidates get 5%. That's 15% of the vote. And none of them get counted. They get counted in the entry poll. They don't get counted at the end because the final results, those 5% have to go, those people have to go someplace else. Let's say they all go to one candidate. It's not going to happen, but say they all go to one candidate who gets an extra 15 points. Well, that person now has probably a very large victory, but it's not reported on. It just seems like it's
and this is happening,
confusing for no reason.
And this threshold concept and reassigning people is occurring in each of the locations all around the state. So it's not like one movement in one location.
So why are they doing this?
Well, there was more still, but yet there's more.
Okay.
So we have vote counts, we have entrance polls, and we also end up at the end of the night with the numbers that kind of really matter is the reassigned number, and then that converts into delegate counts, state delegate equivalents. And so we end up with people who are going to presumably eventually make it to the Democratic Convention, and they cast a vote. And when you're watching the Democratic Convention in the summer, you're going to hear about Iowa and New Hampshire, and you're going to say, wow, those were big things way back when. I haven't heard much about them since.
And we actually might miss it at that point as well.
And might not even get that far. So
Iowa has had a history of occasionally changing the trajectory of a race. Mm-hmm. Obama is the best example in 2008 on the Democratic side. Hillary Clinton had been up and up and up, and then finally in the final month, he closes the gap, and then he wins, and he wins by 7-8 points. It's a big win. It's really a body blow to the Hillary Clinton campaign. In other cases, it hasn't been so surprising. But what happens here if, with this many candidates, if one candidate says, yep, I won, because on the entrance poll, he or she won. Another candidate comes out and says, "No, see, I won after the initial count," and then a third one. What's going to be like a month later?
No. Then you have the reapportionment. Count.
But how long does that take?
Well,
a week later, a few days.
So everybody will be in New Hampshire,
right? And everybody's in New Hampshire.
But this is also, is this really the first time though that Iowa is releasing the raw vote totals?
Yeah, I believe it is,
and there's never been this entrance count before.
Well, but the other thing is that you do have a situation here where you have the reassignment, if you don't make threshold, can only occur among the candidates at that location who didn't make the threshold. So in a sense, in the past, if you had 20% and you wanted someone else who you were going to pair with later to get an extra 2 or 3% of your 20%, you still make threshold, you could boost someone else over. Now you can't do that. It's only the people below the 15% who can go to the other corners of the room.
But
so there's a subtle change there.
Isn't this also a kind of a test of the campaign's organizational strength as well?
That's an important point.
Well, sure, but that's always what Iowa's been. What I would argue is that this tests the strength of the organization in no different way than has been tested before. What it does do, though, is it allows multiple campaigns to claim victory when only one really can be the
Although
the
we've had such close outcomes in some of the Iowa caucuses.
Last time it was the flip of a coin.
You do end up
literally.
with
right. Well, and you can go back to 2004, and Dean came in third. Came in third. Yet he was. I'm on the, and it was a big victory for him, allegedly.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's not easy, but to Barb's point, though, the campaigns have to get commitment of their people. They're not just showing up and voting and leaving. This is, a real effort to get people to say, maybe when it's snowing and cold out, come and spend an evening.
I like the caucuses. I'm not saying I don't like the caucuses. I just don't think that they need to fiddle with this year with all these candidates on the ballot.
No, you got a point there.
So just to switch gears a little bit now, with our partner, NPR and the PBS NewsHour, we did a poll recently on election security, kind of getting off the two big topics of impeachment and Iowa, but very related and very important to the election season that we're about to commence. So joining us from NPR is Brett Neely, editor with NPR's Washington desk. Thanks, Brett, so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Barbara.
At first blush, the survey looked really positive. We had 53% of Americans saying that the United States is prepared to keep November's elections safe and secure. We also saw an uptick in the proportion of Americans, 62%, who said that they consider elections to be fair, and this was up from 51% in October. But that's not really the whole story of this poll. Tell us a little bit about what's some of the things that we found that perhaps are not so positive.
Well, I would say the thing that stands out to me is that 4 in 10 Americans, 41%, don't think the country is prepared for the elections, and that there's a huge partisan divide. 2/3 of Democrats, 67%, don't think it. Even though, on the flip side, Republicans are highly confident. Something like 85% of Republicans think. So, the same sort of choose your own reality that we are seeing in all facets of politics, has intruded on this. And the danger really is that whatever happens on election day, people may not believe the results and may not trust the results. So, when I see that 53% of Americans don't think that the country is prepared, I see the potential for a lot of unhappiness and a lot of an environment where conspiracy theories could flourish, the day after the election if someone's side loses.
Well, I think you're right about that, because it's, there's one thing to get beaten. The other thing is to, claim that this in some way was rigged or a hoax, or the election, whatever, that you were robbed in one manner, shape, or form. And that's where the legitimacy, of the system gets into question. That's why I thought this poll was particularly useful in understanding some of the shortcomings of, people's worrying about the health of the democracy, which is something we're seeing every day. So,
Yeah.
Were you surprised to see such a large partisan divide? I mean, when we look at other issues that can be very contentious, we often see some consensus or agreement that people are dissatisfied by the debate or they're dissatisfied by the policy. But in this instance, the partisan divide is very, very wide.
I'm not that surprised, and I'm not that surprised for a couple of reasons. One, we did a similar poll with you right before the 2018 midterms, and we found a divide like this as well. I would also say that on this specific issue of election interference, it's become extraordinarily polarized because, this all comes from the 2016 election when Russia, did various things, including, hacking emails, and spreading disinformation, and a lot of it, as we've subsequently found out from the intelligence community, was done sort of on behalf of President Trump's campaign, not with the coordination, but just was done to assist him. And President Trump has always found it very difficult to acknowledge that, and has always downplayed any interference that Russia's had. And so because of that sort of taint on his legitimacy, for better or for worse, I think a lot of Republicans have really rallied around him and say, no, the interference isn't that big of a problem, because to start to acknowledge that would start to unravel a lot of other issues with them for Trump. And I might be going out a little bit further than the poll results bear up, but that's certainly, I think, what you hear as well when you see on the ground reporting, of the kind that I've worked with a lot of our reporters here.
Although 77% of Americans do think that foreign countries will spread false information about the candidates running for office and will get in the middle of the campaigns.
Yeah, that's one of the really also disturbing findings from this poll, is really how pervasive people expect disinformation to be, and also that they just don't expect to be able to identify disinformation and respond to it. And another one of the really striking findings that we had was that 59% of the people we surveyed, or you surveyed really, not NPR itself, was that they found it difficult to tell the difference between what's factual, and what's misleading. And people thought it was going to be even harder in 2020 to identify what was deceptive than it was in 2016. And so, you get a sense of people really having very little confidence in what's in front of them about whether or not, this is a piece of disinformation, or whether or not this is something that they should trust. And, and it's certainly, the president has amplified this as well, with his supporters, telling them, that, a lot of journalism is fake news. But I think that, I think that you could expect to see some of this from Democrats, this kind of lack of confidence, depending on the outcome of the election as well.
It follows, actually, one of the things that I found surprising about this was that when we asked what the biggest threat to election security is in 2020, 35%, the largest number, said misinformation. So it makes sense because so many people are worried about misinformation, and we know that misinformation played a role, as you suggested, in the 2016 election, with at least with the Russian misinformation and others as well. The thing that surprised me here, though, is when we asked if you think it's very likely or not likely, either very likely, or not likely at all, that while misinformation was very high, 77, 82%, very large numbers thinking it was very likely there would be false information out there, which is not a surprise. It's an election. What did surprise me is that there will be voter fraud. That is, people who are not eligible to vote will vote, or will vote more than once. Yeah. 52% said that's very likely or likely. Yet there is essentially no evidence, and there have been commissions, both Republican and Democrat and bipartisan. It has been looked at a million ways to Sunday, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So how is it that Americans have a handle on the fact that misinformation's out there and real, but don't have a handle on the fact that voter fraud is essentially not real?
I think that on that one, I wonder if some of that is that, we have seen in Congress, some agreement on the issue of misinformation, and you've had a relatively bipartisan process in the Senate, and so the discussion of misinformation has been a little bit more even-handed, whereas the discussion about voter fraud, it's really two different universes, and it's been that way for a while, and Republicans have just long insisted that, when we have voter rolls that are inflated for some reason, and, increasingly easier ways to vote, like absentee voting and early voting, that all of that can somehow contribute to it. And there hasn't been sort of a reinforcing message from that side that says, no, this isn't happening. And so it's been also placed into a partisan rubric.
Yeah, it's a little bit of
the best that I can come up
it's a little bit of the Russian nesting doll, and sorry about the Russian part of this, but misinformation within misinformation, right? Because Americans are most concerned and think misinformation about the election is most likely, and then their second or third biggest concern is voter fraud, which is misinformation. Right. There is no voter fraud, right. So it's kind of
right.
It's a cycle, one thing within another.
Yeah,
I would also go ahead.
No, Brett, you go ahead. It's fine.
Well, I was also just going to jump in and say, you also saw, though, right, in that question, that, the sort of democratic inverse to voter fraud is voter suppression. And, that is basically concern that people will be kept from, people who are legitimately qualified to cast a ballot will be kept from voting in some way on Election Day. And, we have certainly seen efforts that impose hurdles on voting, like voter ID laws and attempts to pare back early voting and things like that. But, the other side of that is that, I hear, people as well who sort of casually throw out, well, the voter suppression is such a big issue. And as someone who edits a lot of our voting coverage, while I'm not downplaying the seriousness with, which, in some states, like in Kansas, they've really made an effort to crack down on people who they claimed were unauthorized voters, and there was very little evidence. I would also say that it's also never been easier to vote in this country, at least in the last 50 years or so. Like in almost every state, you can register online, with a couple big exceptions like Texas. Most states now allow you to vote by mail or vote absentee very easily. Many states have early voting. There are just a lot of ways in which voting has become much easier, and there was a real bipartisan consensus around that as well. And so I get a little bit alarmed as well when I see this sort of voter suppression rising, because I see it as an analogous phenomenon, perhaps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I look at the data on this. Your vote will not actually be counted, in 29% nationally saying that that's what they think. Their vote may not actually be counted. And I know, as the pollster in me, I say, well, 29, that's, not a huge number. The political scientist in me says, oh my God, 29%, that's millions and millions of people. So tell me what the political journalist says when they see 29%.
Back to my point, I'm quite concerned about what happens the day after the election, and people are unhappy with the outcome, because it just feels to me like we've really entered an era where where there's not a lot of trust in institutions. There's not a lot of trust in independent sources of information, and one of the things, I work a lot with our member station reporters, and one of the things I've told them is, as important as all the work that we do up until Election Day is the work that we do after Election Day, trying to convince the public that the election results were fair, if they were fair, because I'm not sure that people will buy it one way or another.
Yeah, it sounds like your work could be cut out for you this year, but...
Yeah, there certainly is a lot going on. But to end on a positive note, most Americans do personally think that voting is easy. And despite the fact that they may end up seeing long lines or not getting off from work in time to vote or, just having some problems at their voting place, I think your observation, Brett, that it is easier to vote today than it has been in most times of U.S. history is very accurate. And we really appreciate you joining us to go through these numbers and to talk about this very important issue that is not going to go away by any means.
Oh, absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, your skin is ruffled?
Yeah. All right. So there's something occurred in our political world that really, really got my feathers ruffled this past week. And the New York Times endorsed Klobuchar and Warren for president, which got a lot of people upset because why would you endorse two people? That's a whole other matter.
That didn't get your feathers.
Well, it was interesting, but I don't think it really serves the purpose of doing endorsements. That's for another discussion.
So what got you?
In their endorsement, they were kind of justifying, who can beat Donald Trump? Well, we don't know because they said in a crowded field and with, here it comes, traditional polling in tatters. Ooh. That calculation calls for a hefty dose of humility, blah, 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 blah. Traditional polling in tatters. Where is this fake media? Is this a hoax? Was this, I kind of felt that they were kind of loosely tossing tatters around when the polling community, for folks who listen to us, well, the numbers have been very good in the recent elections.
I just wonder why they didn't pick up the phone and call Nate Cohn, who we had on the show just a couple weeks ago, who's a great pollster. They do great work, right? Yeah. And he himself was talking about the kinds of challenges that the industry is facing, but how the quality polls are doing the right thing and getting the right numbers. And the editorial, they didn't even call their own guy.
Yeah, and in tatters is kind of like, almost like saying failing New York Times. That's like heavy-duty language. I think
who would ever say that?
I don't know, but I think, they should chill on this. They can do their endorsement or endorsements as they wish, but, if you're going to take a quick swipe at polling community, get a little bit more involved.
I was actually surprised that the Times editorial board would actually look to the polls to make their judgment to endorse.
Oh my goodness! Yes.
So
that's a good point.
I find that quite interesting.
Well,
that's actually funny, yeah, because you think. I think they think of themselves as maybe a little bit higher and mightier than maybe other folks.
But
and the polls would not be a reason. We want to back a candidate for their qualities.
Who should occupy the Oval Office.
And here it is. It's like, who could beat Donald Trump? How's that different from the guy that you're interviewing on the street at a Warren rally or a Buttigieg or a Dean rally?
And now it's in print how much polls do matter to the New York Times.
Matter and are in tatter, so it's both anyway. That does it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mary Griffith is our trusted executive producer. Casey Schaff is our trusted editor.
And as always, we want to thank the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University for providing us with the ability to look back at survey questions and their results over the decades. And if you have some questions or comments, please reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram and pretty much everywhere.
And as you may be aware, we've made a tool available not only on campus here to the various departments and the various professors and students, and not only to the fans or the followers of the Marist Poll, but really to everybody. It's called the Marist Poll Academy, and it's an online academy, an online learning platform. It's visual and it's engaging, and it helps answer so many of the questions that people have about polling. And if you're listening to this podcast, you care enough about polling that maybe there's more that you could learn or that you want to learn. So check it out, Marist Poll Academy. We'll put the URL down in the show notes. It is free. Can't say that enough. It's free. We put a lot of work into it. I think you'll like it. Finally, if you like what you hear in Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review on your podcasting app, whichever one you're listening this on. Positive reviews help other people find us and, spread the love, right? Everybody wants to get a little Poll Hub in their lives. We'll see you next week.